Your brother will take your room because he needs more space. Dad said it like he was announcing the weather. And before I could even breathe, Mom snapped. Agree or get out of this house. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the roast chicken smell. My brother smirked, eyes glued to his phone, pretending not to hear. I felt the air thicken, the family portraits watching, every smiling frame suddenly mocking me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said nothing. Just smiled. Because that's what they taught me, stay quiet, stay grateful, stay small. That night, I lay on my narrow bed, the one they once called temporary. I stared at the ceiling and wondered if love always sounded like orders shouted across a dinner table. HY everyone, my name is Lena Quinn, I'm 27. And if you think you know how this ends, stay tuned. Tell me, what do you do when the people who raised you start measuring your worth in square footage? I watched my brother drag his things into my room the next morning. He didn't even knock. Nothing personal, he said. It's just easier this way. He tossed my old photos into a box like clutter. Mom stood behind him, arms crossed, nodding as if this was justice. Something cracked inside me, not like glass, more like ice. Quiet, spreading, irreversible. That evening, I looked across the street through the dusty curtains and noticed a for sale sign in front of the white brick house opposite ours. The windows caught the sunset in a way that made it look free. Empty, but alive. I stood there until the light faded. By morning, I had already made the call. By nightfall, I'd already transferred the down payment. 1 week later, a moving truck pulled up across from my parents' house. They stood at the porch, confused, watching as I stepped out holding my keys. I smiled the same smile they taught me, polite, emotionless, final. Good morning, I said. And that was the beginning of the end. If this ever happened to you, say same in the comments. The first night in my new house was silent, too silent. No clinking dishes, no slamming doors, no mom's voice echoing through the walls. Just me, and freedom that felt almost foreign. I unpacked slowly, placing things exactly where I wanted, not where someone told me to. Each sound, the creak of the floorboard, the whisper of my curtains, felt like proof that this space was mine. No one could take it, rename it, or need it more than me. Across the street, their windows glowed. From my front porch, I could see everything, the same dinner table, the same laughter. They didn't even glance this way. Until the next morning. Dad was watering the lawn when he saw me. He froze, hose still running, eyes narrowing. Then Mom stepped out in her robe, saw me waving, and went pale. She whispered something sharp. He shut the water off instantly. I smiled again, the same one that once meant surrender, now redefined. Days passed. I woke up early just to sip coffee by my window as they left for work. Each good morning was sugar-coated rebellion. Each look they avoided was another victory. My brother tried to act casual when we crossed paths. He laughed awkwardly. You really bought that place? Yeah, I said softly. I needed more space. His smirk faltered for the first time. Inside their house, I noticed the curtains drawn tighter each day. Mom stopped tending her garden. Dad skipped mowing the lawn. Something about my existence across the street unnerved them. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about peace. About making them feel the quiet they had once forced me into. At night, I'd stand on my porch, light flickering behind me, a mirror to their guilt. And in that glow, I began to plan what came next. Because silence is only satisfying until you learn how loud regret can get. 3 weeks later, they finally cracked. It started with Mom knocking on my door, too softly for her usual tone. When I opened it, she smiled like she was rehearsing kindness. I just came to see if you're comfortable here, she said. Her eyes darted past me, scanning the neat living room, the new furniture, the quiet glow. Looks nice. It wasn't a compliment. It was disbelief. Thanks, I said. It feels like home. Her jaw tightened. You didn't have to move out so dramatically, you know. We were only trying to help your brother. I met her gaze. By throwing me out. She laughed, brittle, defensive. You're overreacting, Lena. You always do. Then she left. That night, I noticed their house lights still on past midnight. Their voices carried faintly through the open window, arguing. Dad said, She's trying to make a point. Mom hissed, she won't last. Just wait. But I did last. And I didn't just wait, I built. I started working extra hours, redesigning the place room by room. Each purchase, each small victory, felt like rewriting history in paint and polish. The house became my mirror, quiet on the outside, strong within. Across the street, I could see cracks forming. Mom stopped hosting her Friday dinners. Dad started leaving early for work. My brother barely came home anymore. One afternoon, when I caught Dad glancing at the sold sign I still hadn't removed from my lawn, I waved. He looked away. People say revenge is satisfaction. But sometimes it's just peace, performed slowly enough for them to notice. I started a small ritual. Every Sunday morning, I'd sit on my porch, sip coffee, and greet them with a calm, good morning. Every time, Mom's lips tightened. Every time, Dad avoided my eyes. They thought I'd come crawling back. Instead, I stood taller, and smiled wider. And that smile was only the beginning of what I planned next. Autumn came early that year, leaves turned copper before I expected, and with them, the tone of our street changed. Their laughter disappeared. The curtains stayed closed even in daylight. But every morning, I still said, good morning. It became our ritual, one they never asked for but couldn't escape. Sometimes Mom would mutter, ridiculous. Sometimes Dad would pretend to take a phone call. And my brother? He stopped waving altogether. But I noticed something else, small, delicate cracks in their perfect image. The garden Mom once bragged about was now overrun with weeds. Dad's car sat in the driveway with a parking ticket fluttering on the windshield. I never laughed. I just watched. One night, as rain fell softly on the roofs, I saw lights flicker in their living room. Shadows moved fast, shouting, pacing. It was faint, but the silence that followed was louder than the storm. A week later, a for rent sign appeared in front of their house. I stood frozen at my window. They were leaving. The next morning, Dad crossed the street, his shoes crunching over the wet gravel. Lena, he began, voice uneven, we're downsizing. Just temporary. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maybe you can look after the place. I almost laughed, but didn't. Sure, I said softly. I'll keep an eye on it. He nodded, relief flashing too quickly, like he just wanted permission to fall apart. When they drove away a week later, Mom didn't even look back. The house stood hollow, echoing the same silence they'd once forced me to live in. I walked across the street that night, stood on their empty porch, and touched the peeling paint. Funny, how the same walls that once held my humiliation now held my peace. And as the wind rustled through their forgotten garden, I whispered, good morning. Because sometimes revenge doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives quietly, one sunrise at a time. For a while, peace felt almost too easy. I woke up in my new home, sunlight spilling over freshly painted walls, the smell of coffee filling the air. There was no shouting, no cold silence, no tension waiting to explode. But peace, real peace, has a way of testing you. 2 months after they left, a car pulled up in front of their old house. A couple stepped out, strangers. The woman looked around, smiling at the garden as if it had always been hers. My chest tightened. They'd sold it. Not rented. Sold. The house I'd grown up in, erased like a page torn from my life. That night, I sat on my porch longer than usual, watching the lights flicker on in their old kitchen. For a moment, I almost saw Dad at the stove, Mom setting the table, my brother laughing at something on his phone. But the silhouettes weren't theirs anymore. I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, I felt something heavier, something like the echo of forgiveness trying to be born. The next morning, I found a letter slipped under my door. No envelope, just folded paper with Dad's handwriting. Lena. We're staying with your aunt for now. Things didn't work out the way we thought. Your mother's been quiet. She misses you. Take care of yourself. Dad. I read it 3 times. No apology. Just silence between the lines. I didn't reply. But that night, I turned off every light in my house and stood by the window. Across the street, their house glowed warm, new life moving inside. Mine glowed back, steady, alive, and unshaken. And in that reflection, I realized something. I hadn't just bought a house. I'd brought back my voice. The one they tried to silence at that dinner table. The one that still whispered, softly but fiercely, "I'm home now." Winter settled in quietly, wrapping the neighborhood in frost. Each morning, my breath fogged against the cold glass as I looked across the street, at the life that used to be mine. But this time, there was no bitterness left. Only distance. One evening, while shoveling snow, I saw my brother walking up the road. He looked older, tired in a way arrogance can't hide. He hesitated before calling out, "Lena." I straightened, resting on the shovel. "Didn't think I'd see you here again," I said. He glanced at the old house, now glowing with strangers' laughter. "They sold it for less than half. Mom's been crying about it every day." Then softer, "You really bought this place just to spite them?" I smiled faintly. "No. I bought it to survive them." He nodded slowly, as if he finally understood. Then he handed me a small box. "Dad wanted you to have this." Inside was my old house key, scratched, cold, familiar. I turned it over in my palm. "Too late for keys," I whispered. He didn't argue. Just said, "They're not doing well. Mom says she hears you say good morning in her sleep." For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But I did neither. I just looked past him, at the porch light that once belonged to us, and said quietly, "Tell her it's time to rest." As he walked away, snow began to fall again, thick and forgiving. And for the first time in years, I felt the air clear around me. Some stories don't end in shouting. They end in silence, and understanding. Weeks passed, and life began to breathe differently. The mornings weren't about watching them anymore. They were about tending to my small world, the garden I planted where I once stayed, waiting for validation that never came. Each sprouting leaf felt like a conversation I never got to have. Every bloom whispered, "You made it without them." But peace, once again, didn't stay unchallenged. A letter arrived, this time from Mom. Her handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged near the edges. "Lena, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know we're proud, even if we never said it. You turned out stronger than any of us imagined. I wish I'd been softer. Your father isn't well. If you can, please visit. Mom." I read it slowly, feeling the words bruise instead of heal. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to protect the version of myself that had finally stopped needing their approval. But another part of me, the one that still remembered childhood bedtime stories and Sunday pancakes, couldn't ignore it. The next day, I drove to my aunt's house, where they were staying. Mom opened the door, smaller now, older in the eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Lena," she said, trembling, "you look so much like peace." Dad was in the living room, a blanket across his knees, staring at the muted television. He didn't say much, just a quiet, "You did well." It was the first time he'd ever said it. I didn't cry. I just sat there, between them, letting the weight of old battles dissolve into something softer. They weren't villains anymore. Just flawed people who didn't know how to love out loud. When I left, Mom followed me to the door. "Do you still say good morning to us?" she asked gently. I smiled. "Every day." And when I stepped back into the cold, I finally meant it. Sometimes revenge fades into grace. And grace, that's the loudest piece of all. Spring arrived like forgiveness, unannounced, but gentle. The snow melted, revealing new roots pushing through the soil of my garden. Everything I'd planted in silence was finally blooming, wild, imperfect, alive. One morning, while sipping coffee on the porch, I saw a small car pull up near my old house. A young family stepped out, laughter spilling from their open windows. The father lifted his daughter into the air, the mother twirled in the sunlight. It was the kind of joy I once dreamed of finding inside those same walls. And now, watching it from across the street, I felt peace. A week later, another letter arrived. This one, shorter. Dad passed quietly in his sleep. "Mom's staying with me now. She asked if she could visit you someday. Your brother." I set the paper down and looked at the house across the street. For the first time, it didn't look like a wound. It looked like a memory, faded, harmless, forgiven. That evening, I turned off my lights and walked to the porch. The sky burned orange, the same shade as the night I left. I whispered softly, "Good morning," to no one in particular, and yet, it felt heard. Then I went back inside and stood in front of the mirror. 4 years, I'd searched for their reflection in me, their approval, their acceptance. But the woman staring back was mine alone now. I picked up the old key my brother had returned. For a long time, I just held it, not out of nostalgia, but as proof. Proof that sometimes you lose everything before you finally belong somewhere. I walked to my front door, pressed the cold key against it, and whispered, "This is home." Outside, the world kept moving, cars passing, birds calling, and neighbors' laughter drifting through the air. And for the first time, I didn't need to be seen to be free. Revenge had turned into peace. And peace had turned into me.